This poem is called A Diminishing Space Between a Mouth. Recalling another brief moment in a dream where a reverse word reverses. On the other side of the wall in an empty room, a pencil depicts a letter, a period, or perhaps a skull. Recalling a man living inside the membrane of spaces, closed and away from faces, building structures with sandstone rocks on the mesa top overlooking the Santuario de Chamayo, remembering the devil and God, redacted, recalling the red earth from the chamber that once healed him from utterance, remembering the man who turns a beam held within an absent room where darkness flows up and never down, recalling the wind swaying against the rocks and sand below calling the name and summoning the cries for a Christ on a hill, redacted. In the wide spaces of the night sky, in the light showers, hiding the stars until they cease to shimmer, catching the vacuum of the dying light, the fading light, the fading light. Shadows dance on the other side of the wall, trying to resurrect the cursive soil of energy emanating from the lead tip. The sandstone hardens over time, but can crumble quickly, rejoining the other sediments and restarting the solidification process of pressure, time, light, tension, silence. All define the silhouette of the body of existence, trying desperately to remember. Most of all, he remembers. He is lost and darkening in the syllables, disassembling against the air. The second poem I'm going to read is called Constellation. Happening in a small room in the back of an empty building at the center of Denver, leaving a sloppy recognition on my face. Standing in a room at night with the other self, a spatial moment of recollection and reflection. A stride in my walk leading me to a large city, forgetting the star dreams of mothers who search longingly for their desperate sons. Turning my head, weeping, covering my eyes from all midnight skies and colors carving out mesas, remembering the days of stolen celestial memories and persistent confessions. Lost among conversations and the smell of nicotine on the fingers, falling into differential phase of lunar refraction, a plate glass scattering about the floor, an irretrievable feeling of a mist still lingers as fragments and sickness. Raining a few days ago and leaving the streets as an exuding cluster of displaced recluse stars, rendering a meld of structure into an ocular madness. They compromise the wills of prevailing sinners, attempting to coexist in a space as two bodies. After leaving this gathering of bodies and exiting the building, forgetting the flailings of my desires, walking the streets of this glistening city, discovering myself, staring at another ceiling of luminescent stars trailing back to me, a concealing constellation where I await the discovery of another bed not meant for sleeping, but for traveling, alone, seemingly shell-shocked, not for the sake of war, but for the chance of meeting anyone in a meaningless face where everyone is standing ever closer as cigarette smoke in the night sky.
We're speaking with Crisosto Apache. He's Colorado's 11th Poet Laureate and the first Indigenous person to hold the position. Originally from the Mescalero Apache Reservation in New Mexico, Apache is an associate professor at the Colorado Mountain College of Art and Design and a passionate advocate for the Two-Spirit Native American LGBTQ plus identity. You mentioned wanting to write from a landscape that teaches us how to listen. How does the specific geography of Colorado, or New Mexico for that matter, influence the sound of your poetry?
Well, I think a lot of what I do when I write, I first start off observing And one of the things that I used to do, and I still do now, is I love driving. I love driving through, the mountains.
Sure.
I love driving. When I lived in New Mexico, I used to drive through northern New Mexico. Because, the landscape was so beautiful. You see the colors of the mesas,
Yeah.
the trees, and then they move into the mountains.
Yeah.
So for me, it was really more about just, observing the landscape. And it's very, the landscape is inspirational because there's a lot of history in the land. If you really think about it. When I was first appointed, I was given an interview, and in that interview, I talked about the land before people were here, before the state capital was there. There was land, and before people even thought about occupying the land.
Yeah.
It's been there. And we just happen to come through the land. So I kind of think about that, and it does invoke poetry when I think about it. And my third book, Isness, is really about the reflection of the things that I did during my life, because I would go to the mountains after doing my days, whatever, down in the city or towns or whatever, working. And on the weekends, I would just drive up to the mountains and find a clearing and just sit there and just write. You know, there's peace. It was quiet. You can hear the earth move, and that's what was really calming for me, to just sit and write.
Yeah, I went on vacation throughout New Mexico, just driving all over with, I was married at the time, and she said, is that all you're going to do is write poetry? It's like, I can't help it. It's New Mexico.
It's a calling.
Oh, man. Yeah. Your term coincides with the 150th anniversary of Colorado and also the 250th of the United States. How do you plan to use poetry to navigate the complex and layered Indigenous history within the state and national celebrations?
Well, for me, as an Indigenous person, I always look to storytelling. Storytelling is a very powerful tool when it comes to writing, because everybody and every place has a story to tell. And that's why I'm very interested in going to visit a lot of the smaller communities in the state of Colorado, because I'm interested in hearing those stories.
Sure.
Because I've lived in the Front Range for a good part of my life, and I already know the story there, but I don't ever get to interact with the smaller communities here in Colorado. And I used to drive around New Mexico and visit the smaller communities and talk to people, and man, they have stories to tell.
In your work, you've spoken about the struggle of reclaiming your mother tongues from the English language force-fed, during the boarding school era. How does your role as Poet Laureate help in this reclamation process?
I always talk about being an instructor. It's very ironic that I'm an instructor of English writing.
Yeah.
It's kind of one of those funny things. But in my household growing up, a lot of the languages that was spoken, my mother knew, I think, 5 languages.
Wow.
She knew Diné, she knew Apache, and Mescalero and Chiricahua. She knew Spanish, English. And so, it was kind of interesting to know that she navigated her life in those languages. And for me, I was always fascinated by that. She wasn't like an educated woman, but she was very caring. She finished, I think, up until 10th grade and then just stopped going to school. But there's something about the way she endured life really empowered me to continue and to sort of do as much as I can while I can, and she really influenced me on that. But the speaking of language, I think is very important. But it's difficult for an Indigenous person or even a person that does speak like a language other than English, because you have to interact with that language. If you don't, then you lose it.
It's just words, I've been trying to learn some Shoshone,
Yeah.
and I'm lost in the weeds with that,
Yeah.
because you're absolutely right. If you're not using it, it's this word means that, that sort of thing. So.
But I love the language, indigenous language that I come from, because a lot of it is not just, I think we take language for granted. We take speaking for granted. But in terms of like how I understand the languages that I come from, which is Apache and Diné, I grew up in both cultures. There's so much to say about the language because it's so descriptive, and and if you try to translate that into English, you lose a lot of that meaning because one term could mean a lot of different things.
How varied are the Diné and Apache?
They're very
cultures?
similar. They're
Yeah.
very similar because they fall into the same family, linguistic family.
Yeah.
So a lot of the languages are pretty close. I'm working on an anthology, and we just finished writing the intro for that.
Yeah.
And there's a concept in our intro that we talked about because the person I'm editing this anthology with is also Apache. So we've been talking about this concept in Diné or the Navajo. They have a term called, what is it? Hojo. Hojo is like a concept rather than, if you translated that into English, it could just mean beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you think about it conceptually, it's much more than that. In the same way for Apache, it's Gujo. So there's kind of a similarity in the words.
Do you find yourself writing in your original language at first, or do you translate? Or
My first book, I did a lot of it in Apache. But there was a question that when I had a friend read it, the question that this friend of mine posed to me was like, who is your audience? So I really had to consider that. And I went through the manuscript, and I, had to pull a lot of that out just so that the book can be accessible to a wider audience.
Sure.
Because not a lot of people speak Apache. And if I kept that in there, the association would be like people back home.
Yeah. But still good to have it.
Yes, it is. So I still kept a lot of that in the first book. But what I did in terms of orchestration in the book was that I put the meaning next to the word in Apache so that there was some comparison.
Sure.
So for me that was a design or a structural element that I added to a lot of the poems in that book.
Now, you've expressed, and part of being Poet Laureate has to do with working with young people. And what is the quiet miracle of poetry that you hope to share with students who might feel their voices aren't heard?
Again, it goes back to the idea of observation. How much are you really paying attention to what your immediate, environment is about? For me, that interaction it is quiet. You are experiencing that in that moment, and if you're paying attention, that's when poetry talks to you. So for me, I'm always observing like what's around me, just like even here, like the pot that's in front, or even just the cameras where they're sitting, or the microphone, how close it is to. Just paying attention to just the environment, because if you take time to notice the small things, that's the quiet relationship that you're establishing for the basis of poetry.
Let's talk about the two-spirit identity. How does your identity as a two-spirit person shape your view of the traditional role of a storyteller, a medicine person in modern statewide context?
It's taken me most of my lifetime to understand that, because when I was growing up, I didn't have any mentors. I didn't have anyone to look up to that would, explain that concept to me. So I spent a lot of my years investigating what that meant to me. And, the only knowledge I ever gained was what I read in books, and what I found in books it was close to what I was experiencing, but it wasn't that entirely, because what I was missing was the cultural aspect of that concept for me, being an Indigenous person. It wasn't until I was an adult that I totally understood what that was.
Yeah.
So it took me going back to where I'm from to find out more of that. So talking to, relatives and talking to my mother about these concepts, it started to make more sense to me about that role and how I'm playing that role in my culture.
Sure.
And it's exactly what I'm doing. I'm a teacher. I'm a writer. I'm a creative person. And I'm much more than that as well, because I was raising two of my nephews, and the way I saw that role to them was that I was their mother, I was their father, I was their uncle, I was their auntie, all wrapped up in the same thing, because I had to care for these young individuals, and they needed all of that, to understand who they were as human beings.
I'm just trying to imagine that phone call from Governor Polis.
Oh.
Famously, you thought somebody was pranking you or something.
I did, because how often do you get a call from the governor?
Never.
Never in my life would I ever thought that would be a thing for me. So, I had to think about that for a couple of hours, and then I finally convinced myself, I really need to ground myself and go back and listen to that, because it's probably real, So once I convinced myself that was a real thing, and all the emails started pouring in, I was like, because I didn't know that I was, even, I knew people have been telling me I should apply, but it's like my full-time job is really, demanding, all the places that I need to go, travel, conferences, and all of that, grading, teaching.
Wow.
It's a lot. And then
you were busy to begin with.
Right. So to add that on top, it's like, I can't do that. But then here I am doing it, But it's definitely, made me think more about what I can offer, what my capacity is to offer.
Sure.
My knowledge, what I think of the world, even my writing. If I can teach that to younger people, and I can get them involved in telling their story, or getting them to understand that their voice is important, and their perspective is needed.
Yeah.
That to me is what feeds my need to be a teacher.
How long does your term go?
It's a 2-year term.
Yeah.
So it's 2026 and 2027. And at the rate I'm going, I think it's going to go pretty fast. Yeah.
Well, there are some that were 2-term.
Yeah, right.
So,
I was looking at the U.S. Poet Laureate, who's the current one. His name is Arthur Z.
Oh, okay.
He just got reappointed for a second term. So, and ironically enough, he was my first poetry teacher.
Wow.
From the Institute of American Indian Arts when I went to school there. I didn't start out as a writer. I was a painter. I was an illustrator.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Does your painter's mind translate as
I think
a poet?
so, because a lot of my poems are they have a lot of imagery in them.
Yeah.
And I depend heavily on that. And it was Arthur Z that really encouraged me to write the way I do.
Yeah.
Definitely, I've learned a lot from him, and it's crazy that he became the Poet Laureate of the United States, and then here I come, being one for Colorado. So that is kind of weird for me to think about that.
You mentioned that you jot down concept in an organized folder system on your computer. How does a rambling idea eventually transform into a finished poem in a collection like, say, Ghost Word or Genesis?
Wow, you really went out.
I did some research, man.
Okay.
But
I kind of forget I say things like that. Well, yes, I've been writing my whole life. I'll hear something, something will come to me, I'll write it down. And ever since I got my first computer, I started, trying to think about how I'm going to map all my writing out. It wasn't until I got into grad school that I had the notion of like larger projects. So they were no longer just poems that I was writing.
Yeah.
I now started to orchestrate them into, these projects.
Sure.
And so I would make folders of where I thought my writing would best fit. So I've got like 8 projects in folders that I'm working on. I'm working on 2 simultaneous poetry collections right now.
Wow.
And then I'm starting another one, which is kind of a hybrid. I think it's like a memoir kind of thing, but it's poetry and prose. But the 2 books that I'm working on now, one is called Swift Cinder, and a lot of it's an epic style poem, and a lot of the excerpts from that book have already been published widely. And the same thing for the second book that I'm working on as well, and it's called American Accessory. So I mean, I've been working very diligently on trying to finish those, because my mind works that way.
So we'll wrap it up with your social media. How do people find you?
I'm on Instagram. Just you can search Crisosto Apache and you'll find me.
Okay.
On Facebook as well. Any of my social media, if you just type in Crisosto Apache, I'm gonna pop up.
All right. Well, that's great.
I think Google does the same thing.
Yeah. Yep. Well, it's been great having you here, and thank you for coming down and taking time with us and reading and everything. And
Well, I appreciate
congratulations on your appointment.
Well, I appreciate that, Andy. It's been a pleasure sitting here reading for you all and also just talking about poetry.
Right on.